Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Evolving Solutions Coffee Talk. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I'm joined today by Brandon Rao and Jay Stortzum. Brandon is a senior solution architect with us here at Evolving Solutions, focusing on IBM Power and IBM I specifically. And Jay Stortzum is a solution specialist who's been with us for quite a while and has had just a deep experience both here and in prior lives with the IBM platform, IBM I in specific. So looking forward to getting into a little bit more detail with these two gentlemen today. The topic for today is everybody's favorite topic, AI. Specifically IBM Bob and how IBM Bob can help organizations better modernize their IBM I workloads. So welcome, both of you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So, Jay, would you mind maybe giving just a little bit more of an intro, a little bit of background, your history with the IBM I and Power platforms?
Sure. So I'm really only about 35 years old, but I did spend 32 years at IBM. Covered quite a few different roles, but the most of my time was spent on the Power platform. I have done quite a bit of customer selling around Z and all of the different applications and operating systems that go with those two platforms. So primarily Power, but have been an account exec, covered a lot of high-end clients, C-level type of clients, specifically around cost saving and the IBM platform, because it is a very good, robust platform that is probably never going to die, contrary to popular belief.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. Brandon, can you give us a little bit more background?
Sure. So prior to coming to Evolving Solutions, I spent a little over 28 years at IBM. First half was spent in the actual support center, the global support center. And then the last half was in expert labs with the focus on anything Power and Power HA and external storage.
Fantastic. So if Jay's 35 and he's been 32 years at IBM, you must be what, 31?
Close, yes.
Okay,
right around that.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. All right. So I'm going to dive in a little bit and ask you guys, the topic of the day is IBM I, which is just a fascinating platform that IBM has really chosen to step up and provide some real additional tooling, taking advantage of this AI moment that we're in. And maybe Jay, for the folks who are watching this who maybe don't know what IBM I is, what IBM Bob is, could you give us a little bit of overview of the platform?
Sure. So I'll give you the official stance, right? That IBM Bob is an agentic AI development platform. But let's dive a little bit deeper into exactly, what that entails, right? So let's do a little history. So about 3 to 4 years ago, IBM really invested in Watson Code Assistant, which was the backdrop for IBM Bob, and primarily their focus was around modernizing two specific code bases, one being COBOL, which obviously was focused on the mainframe, and along with all of those ecosystems that go underneath that. So that's very important as we dive a little bit deeper. And then for the IBM I platform, RPG was basically, I think, developed back in the 50s, late 50s, and it was developed to do punch cards, right? That's where RPG first got its legs. But as it's grown, it's a very robust coding language. And many of our financial institutions, a lot of other companies, right, rely on RPG. And it's as we've stated, it's a very aged code, but it doesn't break a lot. It keeps running. And that's where IBM Bob comes in, because once something's running, especially on a platform that hardly ever dies, you want to keep that going. So it's a very low touch environment today, but in need of modernization. So this is where IBM Bob comes in. And IBM developed it and marketed it for two basic tracks, is what I'll call them, right? One is the modernization track, and that's where we, for the mainframe or IBM Z, it's specifically there to modernize COBOL, PL1, JCL, those types, even Kix. I believe in update Kix. So it looks at that entire stack, and it can basically understand and digest what that code is doing, all of its interdependencies, and then provide recommendations and then even execute modernization. And we'll go a little bit deeper into how the guardrails are set up around that. But that's basically from a Z perspective. And then similar to IBM I, right? That's where we really focus on RPG. Again, very aged code. And it is in need of modernization. And there's a lot of interdependencies with that. So the real basic way that IBM addresses that, right, is a modernization track for IBM and Z. But let's not forget, right, there's a lot of general purpose coding opportunities out there too. For instance, right, what if we want to take a COBOL code and rewrite it into Java? Bob has that ability to use current coding languages, right, and basically modernize that. We will get into a little bit deeper because I was just fortunate enough to attend an IBM session on the futures of Bob, and that's where they're going to start talking about even more. I mean, this is turning into almost a Swiss Army knife, right, code, right, because it'll start looking at quantum, it'll start looking at secure coder, which we could talk about in a little bit more detail. But that's basically inserting security inside the CI/CD pipeline early, so that that code doesn't get out into production and have vulnerabilities in it.
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the IBM Bob platform for sure. The thing I think is so interesting is, we've seen other vendors, some of the large frontier models like Claude came out with Claude Code. Coding has clearly been a key use case for much of the large language models, much of the AI that we're seeing out there, Gen AI that we're seeing out there. Applying it back to this code base to be able to do modernization is really a great use of that capability. And I know that one of the things that when we're talking to clients, and Brandon, you've been working with clients for 28 years. As you've been working with them, one of the things that have always been challenging is how do you keep the platform modern? So what do you see as sort of some of the key challenges as clients start thinking about trying to make sure that platform stays maintainable and modern?
I think Bob would be the perfect case for that in the respect that a lot of the things that Jay touched on is that Bob not only at its base, but also has the IBM I premium package that we all know that we've got aging people at various companies that they may have hidden that code, stored it in their head, put it in that safe place where nobody ever remembers. And Bob will essentially start you from the ground running, allowing you to not only document and explain that code to new hires or people straight out of college, but it will document, virtualize, graph the flow chart of everything as it progresses through, accomplish all that for you, and create test beds that you can come back to at a later date. So as you go forward and model things, you can record your current behavior, create test plans for that current behavior, maybe refactor your code, and be able to circle all back while maintaining that structure of where you came from and where you went to.
So, I mean, I think you're hitting on one of the key things, which is, and Jay touched on it earlier, these platforms like IBM I and IBM Z as well are mission critical. They're running the core business. In many cases, require sub-second response times, have requirements to be continuously available, and if they aren't, there's immediate, actual, real financial costs to many of the businesses that run these platforms. So at the same time, we've got to make this modernization happen so that a next generation of coders, a next generation of operations folks can actually support and run the platforms. We talked a little bit about how IBM Bob does that, but what are some of the other considerations, or what does it mean to you, Brandon, when you talk about modernizing the platform?
Modernization mainly for me would be taking that current code, making it run as smooth as possible, and then advancing things into the future, like using REST APIs to wrap that current RPG code in, and then be able to make it callable from cloud services or mobile apps specifically, so that you can incorporate and start bridging or moving your market out to farther reaches.
Yeah, and to me, that's the the real gem that is represented by Bob is that ability to take that important asset that is your company's knowledge that's represented in the data and the systems that are there, and be able to make it consumable the way that modern end users, let alone technology users, it's your business users, want to be able to consume things on their phone, through a website, whatever else, being able to quickly iterate changes outside of that and call back to that code. Bob being there to be able to help make those transformations so those things can happen is just a really amazingly powerful tool. One of the things we often talk about that gets overlooked with this is not just modernizing it, but you made the comment just a moment ago, Brandon, that it's safely squirreled away in people's heads, right? They know exactly what they wrote, why they wrote it, all those things like that. How does Bob help go from just tracing those things to making it understandable by somebody who might be new to the organization?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of what I stated out is that it's going to take that either documentation that doesn't exist, create it for you, or lay it out, document it, create the entire flow for you. As far as I use Mermaid in all of my type diagrams just so I can see a flow of the overall application.
Sure.
And then I love the facet where it creates actual test beds for you as well.
Well, and that sort of leads into one of the other questions I had, which is, and maybe Jay, you can chime on this in on this as well. One of the things we've heard a lot with large language models, and it's getting better over time, but it's still there, is hallucination. It's like you ask it for something, and because it's probabilistic and not deterministic, you get some broad variety of answers that may not be the same answer every time. We're talking about mission critical code. So as you're talking to clients, when do they get comfortable that you're going to use an AI tool to be able to sort of document and make these changes? What kinds of things need to happen to go from just the AI tool understood it to I'm okay with making a modernization change?
Yeah, I think the most important piece is the person in the middle, right? The approver at the middle, because Bob basically doesn't do anything on its own, right? It has the ability, as Brandon mentioned, to scan code to understand it. And I think the really key point there is in plain language, right? Yeah. Because you can digest something and it'll spit back an answer, but understanding that truly what it does is probably the number one thing. But where IBM's history and legacies come in is they've got 30 years of experience with not only the platform itself, but also the code, Java underneath that, right? This is where their mainstay has been. So I think most clients, especially with the person in the middle approving everything, right? They will go out and take a scan of code, find out what it does, provide some modernization concepts, and maybe rewrite some of that code. But then you're always going to have a checker that overviews that code, and you do a live comparison of what Bob currently says versus what the application actually responds to make sure everything is in sync. So there's like a double check that's done there. And I'm specifically talking about the COBOL and RPG use cases that we brought up. Sure. But I think that's where the majority of the value is for our enterprise clients today.
Oh, no, that makes sense. So Brandon, from your perspective, what do you tell a client when they're getting ready to apply an AI system to their mission critical workload that make them a little bit more comfortable about it?
I actually put your question into Bob and had Bob answer it for me. So I think Bob said it best, and I quote, "No combination of evidence makes a change provably safe. It makes it reasonably safe. Bob can make mistakes. Tests only cover what they cover, and production always has surprises." So I think the biggest thing comes back to day one is, document, test, assess the risk, and then also have a rollback plan. Yeah. And if you keep on repeating those phases through, I think ultimately it is, like Jay said, you need that end user in the middle to help guide.
So in other words, and this is a little bit like the security conversation I had a couple weeks ago, we're using all these AI tools, but those fundamental principles haven't changed. Document, test, make sure you have a rollback plan, make sure you've got somebody in the middle who understands what's really going on so that you can validate whatever happened in the way that you expected it to. So
Exactly.
I think that's a really important concept for around AI, period, is it's a tool. It's a tool that allows you to do things in your side of your IT organization, inside of your IT operations, potentially faster, potentially more consistently, but it's still a tool that requires a level of expertise and understanding in order to make it work the way that you want it to.
Yeah.
So
Michael, I'll make one more comment. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead,
sorry,
Jay.
Michael. I was just going to make one other comment on what Brandon was saying. So I think the other important piece here is, especially around COBOL and RPG, right? IBM, as Brandon mentioned, has two premium packages that sit on top of the actual Bob code. And those are very important pieces for the hallucination example you mentioned earlier, because they actually use, instead of using inference and going and asking the LLM, right, whether it's Granite, Mistral, Claude, etc., find out what this code is and provide suggestions. There's actually rules-based documentation as part of those premium packages, and that cuts down tremendously on the hallucination because you're not using an inference engine to guess, right? You've actually got years of worth of experience documented into those two premium packages.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, is just the perfect example of applying the right tool to the right job, right? We can use that inference engine to get you some of that documentation you need and whatever else, but being able to take a deterministic model to validate against that history is just the sort of the best of both worlds for this. Jay, you brought up as we were getting into the conversation around some of the secure features that are coming in Bob as we move forward over the next few months. Can you maybe share some of that with us?
Sure. So I'll talk about two specifically because they are announced products. So number one is IBM Concert, and I know we're talking about Bob today, but there's a good linkage that IBM has discovered, right? So the whole idea around IBM Concert, first of all, is to be able to detect CVEs, right? That is probably the number one issue on almost every one of our enterprise clients, right, is around security. So IBM has an overlay product, an AI ops product, basically, that sits on top of your entire environment and basically scans telemetry data specific to finding CVEs and being able to remediate them through what IBM calls workflows.
Sure.
So now enter Bob into the picture. So IBM Concert just released a product based on Bob, right? Out of the years of research, this came out of Watson Code Assistant also, where Bob could enter something called IBM Secure Coder. So Bob is basically sitting on the very start point, right? Every time anyone is at the keyboard or Bob is actually doing its work, modernizing code, there is a constant checker that secure code does to make sure that all those vulnerabilities are hopefully caught early on in the pipeline and then never released to the industry. So that's one example. And then the other thing that I think the industry sometimes forgets or overlooks is quantum safe, right? So encryption. And that's another product or another facet of the Bob/Concert environment, is that now Concert will be able to identify encryption vulnerabilities within your stack. Both IBM Z and IBM Power are quantum safe, meaning that there's firmware and updates that have quantum safe encryption methodologies built in. So as we go through this cycle, you're now going to have Concert being able to detect them and Bob being able to fix those vulnerabilities right on site. So it kind of flows together, the quantum cyber event and CVE management.
Fantastic. I want to turn from futures to maybe a little bit of what's starting to happen now. And I'm going to start with you, Jay. I know you've had a conversation with a few clients about this and had at least one client get into using Bob. What was it about Bob that made these financial services clients sort of think that it was time for them to dive in right now?
Yeah, so I think the primary one is the push from Claude code, right? I mean, I think that a momentum that is in the industry right now, and then there's others, right? Copilot, et cetera. But I think that has started the groundswell. I think the numbers are around 70 to 80% of clients, enterprise clients, are now toying with the concept, and they're starting small. They don't pick the most gnarliest application out there to go rewrite, but they start small, but they do choose challenging use cases. And I think that started to get down to clients, and now they're feeling safer that it is a good time to start. And I'll go back to Brandon's comment. The number one issue we've had in the financial services clients that we do call on, right, is all around that explain the code that nobody knows and everybody's afraid to touch, right? Once you understand it, then you can break things out and actually create a plan, execute on that plan, and then double check it. And this is almost like having an engineer, a virtual engineer, right, at your fingertips, because it's following some very strident rules, right, to make sure things are accurate.
Yes. So, Brandon, that sounds to me like that's potentially the place for somebody to start if they wanted to see some value pretty quickly, trying to document some of that old code. Is that a good assumption?
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And even to preface a little bit before where Jay went is, I know Tim Rowe, the product manager, has tons of YouTube videos just to get your feet wet. Start using it. You can use like the 30-day trial. There is a Bobathon, and Jay, you might need to fill in on this, but I was under the understanding or impression that Bob, the actual Bobathon, was a private type engagement, but with a customer previous meetings with a customer, they had indicated it was a group. So I know that's out there as well, and I'm pretty sure, I'm positive IBM would offer it as a private entity as well. But like Jay had said, start with that one simple program that everybody stares at, looks at the source, doesn't understand the source, but wants to.
That's great. And the Bobathons are a great way to really start to understand the power of this and sort of the change in dynamic that you need to look at. And as you start using a little bit different tool to do some work that you're used to doing a different way. I know that internally we've hosted our own Bobathon to get our technical team and our sales team familiar with how this AI assisted coding and AI assisted code understanding works. And that's obviously something that as Evolving Solutions can partnership with IBM, we'd be very happy to offer to clients to be able to just dive in and get a good look at that, get that experiential hands-on, because like many things in technology, getting your hands on it and really having a chance to understand how it works and how it changes your workflow just speaks volumes for what's possible. So as we're wrapping up today, maybe I'll start with you, Brandon. Are there other considerations we haven't talked about yet that a client might want to take into consideration as they start thinking about using AI-assisted coding? And also, do you see other things that are coming in the future that are going to impact the way that either IBM I is supported or the way that we might look at modernization?
I would say the biggest thing for IBM is the premium package, and I only see that extending and getting more broad. Not only with the RPG and the COBOL, but there is a database type function within there as well that allows you to understand your queries, how they implement, whether they're going down new engines, old engines, are they creating unnecessary indexes? There's a lot of enhancement coming in there, and I only think it's going to evolve from there and get a lot more in depth. And to IBM I, a lot more specific and like guardrail based, as Jay had mentioned, to further hone in on all these legacy apps. How do we get them modernized? How do we get customers to feel comfortable with the existing code they have and understand what it does, and ultimately move them into the future, whether that's on-prem, hybrid, in the cloud, what have you.
Sure. Well, that's fantastic. Jay, as we're wrapping up, anything you want to share as we're closing out today, or anything you would want to ask clients to do next?
Yeah, I think it's really important to congratulate IBM on being the day zero or day whatever IBM calls that, right? Day zero, day one. I always get confused of which one it is, but they spent prior to any of these products right there eating their own dog food. So they are testing the heck out of every product they release. And Bob is a private example, right? They had hundreds and hundreds of internal use cases of putting it to practice and actually showing the savings before even announcing the product and showing it to clients. So that's a comfort level that our enterprise clients, right, really respect and understand, right? If you can go back to an example, for instance, let's talk off of COBOL and RPG for a second. Let's talk about Java, right? A big pain in the butt, right? It's just about everywhere. And moving from, again, we don't want to touch these environments because they're running well, but Java gets old, it gets out of support, it has problems, it hasn't been updated in a while. Those are heavy lifts. And this is where really Bob is a huge time saver, right? Because it can automate, provide recommendations, and execute that code. And I believe the IBM example that they use is what normally would take 30 days for a major Java uplift now was reduced to 3. And I think it's called Blue Pearl, but I believe that's a documented example. Those time savings, especially in today's economic landscape, those are huge points for our clients to embrace.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, I think it really speaks to IBM's commitment to the mission critical part of an enterprise. That's always been the place where they've really stood out, where they differentiated themselves of making sure that the most critical systems in the world run properly and well, and being able to apply what's really a new technology in terms of large language models and generative AI in an appropriate way, in a properly constrained way, in a secure way to these mission critical platforms is just another great example of that. I think it just doubles down on what they have always stood on top of for their clients. So Jay and Brandon, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to having conversations with folks about how we can help them modernize their IBM I environments, and look forward to talking to you guys again sometime soon.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.